What's up YouTube? Today we are looking at Cherry Audio's CA2600 or 2600, however you want to say it. It's basically a software recreation of the ARP2600. Firstly, I want to say a big thanks to Cherry Audio for sending me this plugin for the purpose of this video. I did actually have my eye on it and I was planning on buying it anyway because I checked another couple of videos and sound demos and it sounded really good. I actually own the Arturia ARP2600 software recreation, but it didn't do something. Maybe it was because of Cubase or something, but it didn't do something particularly that the original ARP did. And I want to discuss that in this video and show you guys some really cool sound design techniques with that little addition that I couldn't get working with the Arturia version. But anyway, so yeah, it's a software recreation of an absolutely classic synth that's responsible for, many sound effects and synths from classic tracks, as well as something particularly special. I'm a big fan of Star Wars, as some of you may know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the ARP2600 was the synth that was used to create the R2-D2's voice sound effect for the original Star Wars trilogy. I actually want to discuss the technique which I believe was used to create that sound effect and use it for, musical contexts. It's quite a usable sound for Psytrance. But anyway, enough blabbering. Let's dive in and have a look at this synthesizer. Okay, let's have a look at CA2600. So the first thing that I think is like the most important that stood out for me is the ability to use this audio input. It probably works in other DAWs. I'm not sure if maybe I was just being a complete noob, or I'm not sure if it was just a complete user error that I couldn't get it to work in the Arturia one. But basically, the input or the preamp and microphone input in the Cherry Audio CA2600 utilizes your DAW's native sidechain capabilities. So you basically, to get a audio input into this little preamp over here, you'd select activate sidechain and enable it or choose your audio input using your DAW's native sidechain settings. So because I've actually got this audio channel with the I've got a vocal sample or two loaded on here, but I've got the fader actually turned down because I don't want to hear it through the DAW. I just want to send the audio directly into the synth. So I've got the fader down and we can set this to pre-fader input. So what that does is it sends the audio from the channel before the actual fader. So any movement on the fader doesn't affect the audio input into our synthesizer. So I want to go ahead here and I want to solo our two channels, the one with the audio and the synth channel over here. And I want to hit play and I want to just send our audio output over here into our VCA, just so we can check, is the audio actually coming through? Just to quickly sum things up for you guys, how the routing on the ARP2600 or traditionally on a 2600 synthesizer works is you've got all these faders over here and subsequent inputs at the bottom. And one of the really handy things about a 2600 is it's all kind of it's a semi-modular synth, so it's all pre-patched. But when you patch something in, it bypasses the little signal that's already going to that channel, and then this then becomes a amount for that input. So if you see along the bottom here, you've got a little indicator as to what each of these is kind of pre-patched to do. So you don't actually have to do too much modular stuff to get some pretty awesome sounds out of this guy. But being able to just, patch something somewhere is a super handy thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn the volume of our filter to VCA input down and then just patch this preamp directly in there. And let's have a listen to what's going on here. So I've just realized to get this actually working the way we've patched it now, we would need to actually trigger the VCA, but we can patch it directly into the mixer like this. So this sample is from the Zenosonics vocal pack.
And I was flying. I didn't know whether I was coming or going. I felt like I'd been
So this is cool for effects processing and that kind of stuff because we can do various, filters, and this actually has like delays and reverbs and that kind of thing built in, which the ARP didn't have. The ARP actually did have a spring reverb, but this has various other types of reverbs and the ability to modulate these effects controls and stuff, which is really, really cool. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to patch this into the filter input over here. I want to turn down these. So I'm bypassing the VCO1 input and letting that fader stay up over here. And then we can patch the output from the filter directly into the reverb over here.
I didn't know whether I was coming or going. I thought you to another world.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to patch the output from the filter into a distortion, and then from the distortion into the delay, and then from the delay into the reverb, and then we can enable all of these. And we can kind of use this as a effects processor.
I didn't know whether I was coming or going. I felt like I'd been plunged into another world.
I felt my feelings.
I was flying. I didn't know. I felt into another world. I felt my feelings.
So what we can do is we can use the sample and hold generator over here to create some random modulation for the cutoff over here. So as you know, unpatched, it's basically got a noise generator in it that creates this sample and hold movement. And I'm going to show you something really interesting about this a little bit later on. But for now, let's just patch sample and hold into this keyboard input over here that should be at 100% by default already. And then we can actually set this rate. Let's sync it over here and then set it to like 1/16. So traditionally, the oscillators in the 2600 would be used either as LFOs or as traditional oscillators themselves. One cool thing about the Cherry Audio 2600 is that they actually added an extra LFO as well. So that frees up the 3 oscillators to be used as audio. But traditionally, you've got, for example, like this VCO2 input into the filter. So we could use this as like an LFO, set this down like this, and then it's traditionally the sine of that is patched in here. But we could patch in like a triangle or saw ramp kind of input if we wanted different shapes. But let's just stick with the sine for now. Okay, so let's quickly look at recreating the R2D2 sound effect. So how I think it's traditionally done is using a microphone plugged into the preamp, but for this purpose I'm just going to use these, vocal samples that I've got loaded onto this channel over here. You can see here this input is like flashing here. So if we patch this output into this over here, you see where this noise generator is patching into the sample and hold. Just for the purpose, to show you guys exactly what's going on, I'm going to patch this sample and hold output directly into the mixer. And let's turn this rate really high. So essentially what we're doing now is we're creating a kind of analog bit crusher where we're, chopping these little segments at a rate of 50 hertz and then outputting each segment to the audio. And then if we patch, for example, like an oscillator into the clock input, then we actually are able to oscillate it much higher. So it becomes like an audio rate signal. Obviously, we don't get to the point where it's high enough to actually be, clean, but, you guys get the picture of what's actually happening here. You're chopping the signal by the rate that you choose here. And we can use that sort of theory to create pitch modulation. But just listen to what happens when we tune this.
I felt my feet leave the ground and then I was flying. I didn't know whether I was coming or going. I didn't know whether I was coming or going. I felt like I was plunged into another world. I felt my feet leave the ground and then I was flying. I didn't know whether I was coming or going.
So you see, it kind of sounds like bit crushing. But anyway, what we're going to do here is we're going to bit crush the modulation, or we're going to bit crush that kind of audio signal and use the output to modulate a oscillator to create a pitch. If we look at oscillator 2, you'll see that it's actually got a sample and hold control here already patched. And then let's say, for example, patch the output here. We can actually unpatch these, and then it'll send through the VCA. So we can just manually trigger it like this. Okay, so we need to remove the clock that we created from this oscillator, or in fact, we can actually just tune it. But I think it's going to be better to just remove it and clock it using the sample and hold. We can sync this to like a beat to make it a little bit more sensible to like a musical rhythm. So notice how it's like when there's no audio playing, the modulation stops. So what we can do is we can actually set up a envelope follower over here to modulate the this VCA. So let's just send envelope follower here into, let's say, for example, the gate input of this ADSR, and we can actually change the tone of this VCA of this VCO by patching in something different. So by default, it's a square, which I think is a little bit too it's a little bit too thick sounding. So we can do like a saw, a sine, or a triangle. Okay, so I want to talk about a couple of the expanded features sort of added to the original ARP2600 that I think are particularly special with the Cherry Audio 2600. You know, obviously apart from the audio input, but I think that's kind of part of the design of the 2600. But anyway, one of the really cool things is they've added a glide per oscillator. So like I explained with their DCO 106 synth, you know, to get those kind of like polyphonic glidey sounds, you know, really big sounding soaring leads, having a polyphonic glide setting really helps. Obviously this is not true polyphonic because it's 3 oscillators fed into a single filter, but you're able to get these really wide sounding lead sounds and stuff. Let me show you quickly what I'm talking about. So this is obviously the init patch. Just going to edit this reverb a little bit. I find that stock reverb, like the spring reverb, is a little bit mid-ranged. In you know, traditional spring reverbs have a little bit too much mid-range. So I actually prefer the sound of a plate reverb. It's a little bit more whooshy. And one thing about this is they've actually added a plate reverb, which is pretty cool. Traditionally, the 2600s only have a spring reverb. So let's go ahead and adjust some of these glides ever so slightly differently on each one. Let's put some effects on here, something like a distortion I think would be cool, and a delay. Maybe we can go with a high pass filter as well, shift this down a bit, give it a bit of resonance. Cool, that sounds nice. So here, traditionally, you know, like I was explaining previously, the oscillators are by default patched to the mixer, or at least to the mixer, which is pre the filter. So they've pre-patched the squares of oscillator 1 and 2 and the saw of oscillator 3. So we can go ahead and change all of these to saw to get a more kind of even sound between all 3 oscillators. Okay, so let's say, for example, we're in a situation like this. We've used all 3 oscillators for the sound. And in the traditional, we don't have an extra oscillator to create a low frequency. So here what we can do is, they've added one, so we can just patch this directly in where the VCO2 control in goes to this filter. And now we can create like a vibrato effect on the filter using the LFO. And much like the DCO 106, like I explained, it's got this kind of delay input, which creates a ramp in the amount of LFO being applied. So another thing that they've expanded on, I don't know if you can see there, I've patched in a sub from oscillator 1. Traditionally, the ARP2600s, the first oscillator was quite limited compared to the second and the third. Obviously with sound design being expanded in latter years, they were doing a lot more advanced things than what was needed when the ARP was obviously originally designed. So having the ability, with the Cherry Audio 2600, basically just copy pasted the idea of the second and third oscillator over to the first. So it's a little bit expanded. You've got a couple more outputs. And something interesting that they've also added is this sub output. It's a 1 octave below square output. So it's handy for these kind of like polyphonic chord type things if you're creating those types of things to get a lower tone out of it. You can actually patch the extra into one of these other inputs if you want, but I feel like we've got a nice sound going on here, so I'm not really going to edit it too much in terms of the oscillators. I'm going to show you something a little bit later on about the sync, which they've also added, which is particularly interesting for FM situations. But like I said, for now, I think the sound is sounding pretty good, and I want to discuss a couple of other additions that they've added. So they've expanded this mixer quite a bit, so you actually have a separate input or separate mixer channel for your reverb and your actual VCA output. So this allows us to create like a send return type of thing, or be able to just process raw straight reverb, 100% wet, which can create some really nice atmospheres and stuff like that. Okay, I want to show you guys the FM capabilities in this guy. So let's just initialize the patch, and what I want to do is I want to turn down 2 of these oscillators. So let's just send the sine output into this VCO1 input. So now instead of the square, we're going to be hearing the sine. So here, what we can do is, well, as you can see here, the sine of VCO2 is pre-patched with one of these faders. So that's a quick way of creating FM with this guy. However, I may have explained this in a previous video, it kind of models the analog FM in where the carrier and modulator kind of detune a little bit. So you'll hear, as you turn that up, there's almost this kind of detuning thing going on. And one way to counteract that is to sync the one oscillator to the other one. So we can actually send this sub output into the sync over here, and let's actually turn this down 1 octave to get a more grindier tone modulating oscillator 1. Let's just change this reverb. Cool, that's sounding nice. So what we can do here is we can set the sample and hold. Let's just sync it to like a 1/16 and sample hold output to one of these inputs. What we can also do is we can, instead of just sending this VCO straight through here, we can actually send it through a voltage processor. So I kind of found this nice spot where this is sounding, it's sounding optimum for this FM sound. But we can patch, for example, the sine output through a voltage processor and then back into this FM amount here. And we can also stack it. So for example, we can send a square into oscillator 3, sync it from the second one, and then send one of these outputs into this one's kind of FM input. And another cool thing about the modular nature of this entire plugin is we can, for example, send this to this distortion pre the filter and then just patch the output out like this, and then we'll have to actually turn this down, I believe, because this is now sending to the mixer. So we're now sending the distortion to the filter, the audio to the distortion and then to the filter. So another cool thing is the ability to modulate the inputs or modulate the settings of these effects using other parameters in your patch. So let's say, for example, modulate this time of the delay. This is a very nice thing you can do to create these really crazy kind of glitchy patterns. Let's see how this turns out. I actually want to turn this VCA down, so we're only really hearing the delay. Well, in fact, let's send this delay output into the reverb. So we're actually reverbing that delay effect as well. I'm just going to put in one long note here and we can play around a bit. Okay, I want to make a melodic lead type of sound, but I quickly want to show you how awesome the audio rate filter modulation sounds in this guy. So to get this going, I've got a simple kind of MIDI pattern that I've created here. I'm actually going to pop it open. If you guys do want to copy it, you can do so and use it in a track. I don't mind. You can just pause the screen there. That's fine. What I want to do here is let's just get a simple pattern or a simple lead going. So I'm going to kind of initialize this by just removing oscillators 2 and 3 from this equation, and then we can patch our saw from oscillator 1 straight into the filter. Let's see what we got now. Okay, so by default the oscillator 2 is already patched into the filter over here on this third little, or on this last fader over here. So what we can do is we can actually just tune this down a couple and then turn this up over here. And you'll notice it gives it that kind of grindy texture. That's essentially FM, frequency modulation of the filter. It's just giving it a very fast sine motion on this parameter, and it's creating that kind of grindy texture. that is sweet. I dig that. Okay, so I've got this MIDI pad. Okay, so I'm going to initialize it again, and what we can do is I actually want to patch the saw wave into the distortion and then directly into the filter, and then let's just turn the distortion down on the mixer over here. Oh, that sounds nice. Let's see what happens when we patch the distortion after the filter. Awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. Again, a big thanks to Cherry Audio for sending me this plugin. If you liked this video, then hit that like button, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please consider doing so. And something that has come up quite a few times with my previous demo videos is I actually don't put in enough sound demos, but I also wanted to keep it quite informational, my videos. So what I'll do is I'll put in a bunch of sound demos here at the end for you guys, and just play out with a bunch of random sounds. For those who don't want the information and just want the sounds, they can skip to this part of the video or whatever. Anyway, see you guys next time. Cheers.